Hi, welcome to the Flex with Aaliyah. I know you've tuned in before because you're such a dedicated listener. And I know you're excited for today's episode, which is what is motivation? I'm your host, Aaliyah, dazzling personality and all. So thank you for joining. Welcome to the party. If you're a first time joiner, welcome. We'd love having you. Today, we're talking about motivation. What is it? Is it a feeling? Is it something that's temporary? Is it sustainable? Is it a thought? What is motivation? And if you're like me, there's probably times where you've put on music and you're like, yes, I am ready to go now. Or maybe you're watching hype up videos, a Rocky Balboa montage of him running on the beach, punching some meat, running up the rocky stairs. Sometimes we watch those videos to elicit a feeling, to help give us a spark to get going. And it ignites us. Is that motivation? Does it keep us going? Is it sustainable? What you might see, especially if you Google it, you'll see that motivation is what gets us going. Habit and discipline is what keeps us going. And when I was in grad school, when we talked about motivation, it is the thing that drives us to action. What gets us started? Okay. Could music be that? Yep. But is that really a why? That really just gets to, maybe I'm tired and I put some music on and it helps rev me up. And that's really what the music's doing. It's not driving me to action per se. Another way you could look at something that gets you going towards action is maybe your parents have high cholesterol, diabetes, heart disease, and that is what's driving you to action, that you don't want to become obese. You don't want to have heart disease. You want to be around for your kids. And maybe that's your motivation. So if that's motivation, and even music can be a motivation, then what is it really? I'm going to take a pause and I'm going to say a quote. Because that's what I do. In the beginning, I say a quote and tie it all together. And this one doesn't have an author, so we'll call it anonymous. And conceptually, I think you can understand it because you've heard something along these lines. And it's that, people pray for the cake. People pray for the cake. Then the universe gives them a pan, oil, salt, flour, sugar, baking soda, all the ingredients that you need to make cake. So you start trying to make the batter, start trying to make the cake. You get frustrated, so you leave the kitchen. Did you give up? Or are you going to go back and finish making the cake? Or you're going to say, screw it, I'm just going to go buy a cake. It's easier. Sometimes, this is not further quote, sometimes we have all the ingredients in front of us and we still don't make the cake. Why? Is it because we're unmotivated? Is it because we're tired? Is tired and unmotivated the same thing? Is it because we don't really want it? Is it even if you have the ingredients, maybe you decide you want to go buy a cake because it's easier. But guess what? You're gluten-free. You're vegan. You can't just go to any grocery store and pick that up. Now, it's actually a little bit more involved. Sure, you don't need to buy all the ingredients, but you're trying to find an easier solution than just do the work. And a lot of people don't want to do the work. You have everything right in front of you. Why is it so hard? I wish I had the answers to tell you why it was so hard. It could be drive, lack of inspiration, tiredness, you feel overwhelmed. There's so many things that it could be. And I saw this, because I heard this quote the other day. And it was that when you are willing to fail again and again and again and again, when you make up your mind to become unstoppable, that's when you give birth to a whole new part of yourself, and nothing will come in your way. And if you haven't found that thing that drives you to action that is so potent, you might not have found it yet, or you might not understand it. You can see every day on social media what thing people are saying in motivational videos. Just get up and do it. Pay now so you don't pay later. Be around for your kids when you're older. All these things. But yet they still don't resonate with people. And it comes down to that change of behavior thing, which we'll have to have another podcast for, because this one is about motivation. But you can see how motivation spurs so many other topics. It's so dynamic because it does come down to changes of behavior. And then begs the question is, can we change our behavior? I would argue, yes, we can. Some people would say no. Those are the people who are like, no, you're never going to change. That's bullshit. There's reasons that someone won't change. They might not know what they are. They might not be able to voice what they are, but there are reasons why somebody isn't willing to do the work to change. But then that's on them. That's on you. And you have to decide whether it is worth it to change or not. And you're not going to change no matter how hyped the video, no how awesome the music is, unless you deem it important to you. So then what the heck is motivation? Like I said before, motivation is what drives you to action. And if we dig a little deeper, this is going to be the educational piece. Okay? One of the things that I went to school for is sports psychology. And we had to talk a lot about motivation, achievement behaviors. So scratching the surface, there's motivation. Then underneath it, it's achievement behavior. What's achievement behavior? Or achievement motivation, then achievement behavior. So what the heck is achievement motivation? Like I need something else to worry about if I already struggle with emotion. Don't worry. It might give you a little insight to actually think about what you're thinking about. That seems a little weird to say, but we think so many thoughts throughout the day that when you start to understand this, when you go to the gym and you realize you're giving yourself negative talk or how you're viewing your workout, that's when those minute changes start to happen. And that's what I mean when I had just said you'll start to think about what you're thinking about. Achievement behavior is any behavior with an achievement context where the goal is to develop or demonstrate high ability or to avoid demonstrating low ability. Okay, so demonstrate high ability or avoid demonstrating low ability. Like, I don't want to fail. That sounds scary. I don't want to show somebody that I suck. Okay, so that's achievement behavior. And then over the course of years and years and years of research, it got developed. That concept got developed. Initially, it was broken down into task-oriented individuals and ego-oriented individuals. And what that meant was if I was a task-oriented individual, I compared myself to myself to previous performances. What ego did was compare yourself to other performances, normatively reference comparisons. That's what that one did. That's kind of how it started. And they initially looked at achievement behaviors in school, and eventually it got to looking at sports. So they looked at soccer, they looked at cycling, they've looked at climbing, a whole bunch of different sports. And there was a group of researchers that took that, and they're like, no, there's got to be more to this. And what they found, or what they created, was a 2x2 framework. That means that there are 4 possibilities for achievement behavior. And they took the same concept of task and ego, but they changed the verbiage. So now it was mastery, performance, And they labeled those as competencies. So it's how you viewed your competencies, comparing yourself to yourself or comparing yourself to others. And then the other framework was valiancy. So it was competencies and valiancies. And there were two competencies that they had: mastery and performance. And now valiance was behavioral tendencies. And it was about how someone goes about completing a task. Are they approaching success or are they avoiding failure? And that is exactly how they were labeled: approach and avoidance. And that's how they came up with the 2x2 framework and 4 possibilities: mastery approach, mastery avoidance, performance approach, and performance avoidance. Now that might sound very confusing, but let's break it down and make it really simple. So I'm at the start line of a race because I'm all about that racing, okay? Or you're at that start line of that race, okay? You're at the start line. You look to your left, you look to your right. What are you thinking? Are you thinking, shit, I don't want to do worse than Karen right here? Or, oh my God, I hope I get that obstacle. I don't want to do worse than I did last time. Okay, those two situations: one, I'm comparing myself to myself, and one, I'm comparing myself to somebody else. And that is that performance mastery piece. Now, maybe you're on the starting line and you look to your right, you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to freaking beat Karen today. That's mastery approach. Nope, whoop. That's performance approach. I'm comparing myself to somebody else, but I'm saying I'm going to do better than. That's what I'm focusing on. I'm focusing on doing better than Karen. Yeah, I'm ready to go. I'm going to beat Karen. I'm going to crush her. Or maybe I'm like, oh God, I just don't want to do worse than Karen. I just don't want to do worse than Karen. I'm coming back from an injury. She's usually the slowest. I just don't want to do worse than Karen. So I'm still outwardly comparing myself. One is avoidant. I don't want to fail. I don't want to do worse than Karen. The other one is I want to wipe Karen's face with my trail shoe. Okay, so outward comparison, Karen. I don't want to do worse. I want to do better. Those are your 4 achievement frameworks, okay? If you got lost in my example, okay, mastery approach. Mastery, I'm comparing myself to myself. Woo! I got this. That's just self-talk. I want to do better than my last 5K. I want to do better than my last 5K. So I'm approaching success. That's mastery approach. Mastery avoidance is, oh my God, I don't want to do worse than my last 5K. I don't want to do worse. I don't want to run slower than my last 5K. That's mastery avoidance. I'm trying to avoid failure. Like I'm running and I'm like, shit, I don't want to lose. I don't want to lose. I don't want to be bad. I don't want to perform bad. But all of that is compared to myself, my own self. Now we have performance approach. Okay, I'm on the start line, ready to go. Oh, man, I want to do better than Johnny. I want to beat Johnny's 5K. Okay, I'm comparing myself to somebody else, but that I want to do better than them. So it's approaching success, but comparing myself to them. Now you have performance avoidance. And you don't have to be on the start line. That's just in my example. Like, oh God, I feel sick. I don't want to do worse than Bobby. I just don't want to do worse than Bobby. My God, you got this. You just don't run slower than Bobby. So I'm comparing myself to Bobby. And it's in a negative way. I don't want to do worse. And that is how the achievement framework is encapsulated, those 4 categories. And what some research has found is that there is a positive relationship between mastery approach goals and effort. So what that means is if people are high high in mastery approach, there's a positive relationship that they're with their effort. So high effort, high in mastery approach. That's what that's saying. And then there's other research that says your environment will also influence your goal orientation. So that if you're put in a task-oriented environment, so where you're going to be self-compared, I'm comparing myself to myself, and you're given a task-oriented goal, people perform better in those environments than in ego-oriented environments. Does that make sense? So, despite what your goal orientation might be, so performance or mastery, comparing myself to myself or comparing myself to others, the environment that I was placed in had an impact on my effort and my perception of success. Research found that people's perception of success was higher and they put more effort and free time in when in a task-oriented environment. So what does that mean to you? How can you take that information? Because that's really what it's all about. How can we take the information we learn and apply it to ourselves? Maybe you don't know what you are. And you're like, oh, okay. Well, you might think that you're mastery approach, performance avoidance, but you don't really know. There's a questionnaire. And I don't remember off the top of my head if it is accessible online for free. But it is accessible. I know that. I know I have it. So I can always distribute the questionnaire to you. And if you want to know, and then I have to evaluate it, your answers, and then you're categorized as one based on your score. So then when you have that information, what do you do with it? So now that let's say I've learned this for the first time, what I would take away from this is my perception of performance has an impact on my results. So if I'm going up to a race and I'm fearing failure, I'm avoiding failure, my performance is not going to be as great if I have a goal that is approaching success. And I've been there. I've done workouts where I'm like, I have to hit pace. I'm like, oh my God, what if I don't hit my pace? And it kind of taints your mentality. It makes you nervous. It puts more pressure on you. Whereas it's almost like a feeling of confidence, the other one. And that's what I'm going to challenge you to do when you go to train next time. And I'm just giving a sporting example. Does it have to be a sporting example? Absolutely not. You can apply it to your relationships. You can apply it to your work. Maybe you're doing a project and you want to do better than Becky on her project. Okay, but if you focus on yourself, which is not mind-blowing that ends up being the better option that provides the better performance, that where you focus your efforts, that's where you're going to shine. Okay, if I'm putting all my work into my training, I'm like, yep, I got this. When you go into it, your persona of how you carry yourself is going to be different than when you go and you're like, oh God, I'm going to fail. You're a little more closed off. You're less confident, might be more hesitant. Like if you do obstacle racing, you might be a little bit more hesitant on the obstacles as opposed to, bam, I got this. And you're grabbing the hold like you have it. That impacts you. Similarly, the research has surmised that those task-involved individuals, so those who self-compare, try harder and actually perform well, especially when challenged. Those who are ego-oriented, when they're compared and they're put in those situations, they turn and run. They don't like being challenged. Whereas those who self-compare, you want to do better than what you did last time. So you're really working on trying to make that forward progress. Because in the grand scheme of things, who likes doing poorly? But your mentality, if I have a baseline compared to myself, that's what I'm comparing to myself. I want to show up and I want to be able to do this math equation better than I did last time. I want to be able to run this 5K better. I want to be able to make this Lego Star Wars figurine faster. Who knows what it is? Be able to do this Rubik's Cube. Those task-oriented individuals will put that effort in more so than ego-oriented individuals. And if you're realizing that you are someone who might do a lot of self comparison to others, it might be beneficial to stop and assess that. Why is that? How could you improve that? My tip to you would be, first things first, start giving yourself individual goals that only relate to you. Okay, maybe it is a lift. Pick a lift. Okay, I want to lift 5 pounds heavier than I did 4 weeks ago. So that's what you're saying your goal on, as opposed to when you come up to, when you happen to be testing, you're like, oh my God, I don't want to do worse than I did last time. No, you're still comparing it to yourself, but that's that negative piece. That's that avoidance piece. People are less likely to go into a situation if they're fearing it. So if you're fearing going to the gym for some reason, let's say you think everyone's going to judge you. You're worried that you're going to look out of shape. When you go in, whether people are looking at you or not, that's all you're going to see. Not one person might look at you. Nobody looks at you. But you're going to feel like all eyes are on you because that's the story you've told yourself. You've made the environment negative. Okay, so to recap things that we said, motivation is what drives you to action. Does it keep you there? No. Deeper down in motivation, you have the concept of self-comparison and other comparison. So comparing yourself to others, your competencies. And then you have your valences, your tendencies towards behavior. Avoid or approach. Avoid failure, approach success. And you came up with 4 goal orientations. And you have performance goals, like I said, that deal with demonstrating competencies via interpersonal comparisons. And then you have mastery goals that deal with demonstrating competencies via self-comparisons. And the valiance refers to behavioral tendencies that reflect how one perceives the task. Valiance is defined as the interpretation of the focus point as either desirable, which is approach, or undesirable, which is avoidance. And avoidance goals focus on the desire to avoid incompetence, while approach goals focus on doing better as opposed to doing worse. That's the main difference. What seems to also be consistent in the research is that having that performance, that comparison to others, isn't always a hindrance to your performance. It's more so having the avoidance valiance, that you're fearing doing worse. What some of the research looked at was taking these performance goals and looking at actual sport performance. And what some of the research has found, not all of it, even performance approach goals have a positive relationship with performance, whereas performance avoidance goals don't. So when you compare yourself to others in an avoidance way, I don't want to do worse than, that does not show a positive influence on your performance. And there was a research study that concluded a higher competitive performance can actually be achieved when an athlete's performance goals are oriented towards trying to perform better than others. So you're approaching. You want to do better than what Kathy's doing. It showed better results than when someone was focused on trying to not perform worse, the avoidance piece. And that seems to be consistent. So the research isn't saying that comparing yourself to other people is bad. It's more so that avoidance piece that is more a hindrance. So when you go into a lift, you're like, oh, this is heavy. I don't know if I'm going to get it. I don't want to do worse than last time. That is a predictor of poor performance. So if you're a negative Nancy when it comes to yourself, or you are a huge self-critic at the start line, in the training room, the likelihood is that it's going to creep in and hamper your performance. It's going to hold you back. And fear of failure is a whole nother topic. It's a very interesting topic, but it's a whole nother topic. Obviously, like I said in the beginning, everything is like multi-layered, and it's hard to talk about motivation without talking about all these other things. And I'm going to go back to that quote that I talked about in the beginning, was that sometimes you're given all the tools. You're given all the ingredients to make the cake, but you're not making the cake. So here's a tool, one of the tools to take with you. Evaluate how you're approaching your performances. Is it more positive or more negative? Are you trying to avoid failing versus approaching success? That's the first step. How are you viewing that? And then your next step would be the self-talk. What are you saying to yourself that is either bringing you closer to success or bringing you away from failure? Because the dynamic of how you speak to yourself is going to be reflective of these goal orientations. And that's something to think about. And then so that concludes our podcast today. What is motivation? There's so much more we can talk about. And if you have questions or comments, absolutely write a review. Put it in there. I want to thank you for tuning in to The Flex with Aaliyah. Refer a friend. It's appreciated, and they might learn something. Maybe they've known some of it and they might pick up a tip, or they might just find it interesting. But getting more people involved in this discussion will help them improve or help start to elicit that change in their behavior. So thank you for tuning in. Super appreciate it. And next week on The Flex with Aaliyah, what are we going to talk about? Drum roll. Let's see if I know. Of course I know, because I write them. But so next week, I have a guest on the show, so you're going to want to tune in. And we're going to be talking about 75 Hard. Is it worth it? What does it entail? So tune into that episode on The Flex with Aaliyah.